Well, I'm Carlos de las Heras. I'm a web developer from Madrid, from Spain. I've been doing Django for 4 years, and this talk is going to be about Django. I work for a small startup company called Quantum Analytics back in Madrid, which the core is data analysis and data intelligence, and I'm in charge of software products, so to say. I was living in Prague for 9 months, and I'm really glad to be here. So I would like to thank the organizers for having me here. It's a great honor and a great pleasure. So around these 25 odd minutes, I will be discussing some core tendencies in web app development and web apps in the last 15 years. I don't know how many of you are web developers. Can you raise your hands? Okay, Django, doing Django, okay. And who's not developing web at all? Okay, I think there's gonna be something for everyone here, so hopefully. So let's get to it. First of all, I would like to start remembering the year 2000. This is the year that Django first came to be. You know Django, this is this really amazing web framework for web development in Python. And this is the year that the Django first came to be. The thing is, I like to remember this because 2003 was a long time ago. Like the set of technologies and web development techniques known as Ajax existed somehow, and it was difficult to do. But the name Ajax wasn't really stated till 2005. jQuery wasn't there till 2006. Like it was the Internet Explorer 6 time. Everyone had Internet Explorer mostly on their laptops, and Google Chrome didn't come out till 2006. This is the pre-iPhone era. That's 2007 when you had the iPhone, and now we're basically carrying our computers on our pockets, no fast wireless internet, etc. So yeah, in this time it was the year that iTunes, WordPress, and LinkedIn and MySpace were released, and we had no Facebook, no Gmail, we had no YouTube, etc. So it's been a long time. Now we are into year 2017, and I say that we have like this kind of weirder internet, in the sense that the uses and ubiquity of the internet has exploded. Like it's everywhere, and we are starting to see really weird stuff going on, like bots, augmented reality, VR, the new stuff like WebSockets, blockchain, async, reactivity. Single-page apps and mobile apps everywhere. There's APIs, lots of APIs, public. There you can mix and match and make your own mashups. And really new, interesting players for the backend and the frontend. For frontend, you have React and Angular, for example, and backends with Node and Go. So it's diverse, it's everywhere, and it's big. And it's only been 14 years, but that's 14 years internet time. So what I see is that there has been like this shift from computing power from the server to the client. So here we have like the traditional life cycle where you would produce an HTTP request to your server, and you would get an HTML back. And then, for example, you would render a form post, and the server will send you an HTML back, rendering a refresh on your browser. But now we're moving more to this kind of SPA lifecycle, single-page application lifecycle, where you would render an HTTP request, and you would get a full-blown app. You would get an HTML and JavaScript bundle, and then that app will be running in your client. And basically, that app is going to be rendering Ajax requests, and you would receive JSON, just simple data. So basically, your client is moving this app in your front end. This is like a response timeline. Typical Django, you would get those responses, the HTML, each one involving a refresh. But in the SPA response timeline, you would have this big download maybe at the beginning. That's basically downloading your app. And from then on, you would receive these yellow responses, which are JSON responses, which are much linear, and it's just pure data. There's also this alternative of lazy loading, in which, depending on when you navigate to certain parts of the app, you would download another chunk. So instead of having a big download at the beginning, you would have a chunk at the beginning, the initial chunk, and then you would have another chunk when you reach some area of the application, thus having like this intermediate solution to these big downloads at the beginning. Of course, right now we have also this amazing protocol called WebSockets. It's not that new, but it's interesting because it's full duplex. Information transmission can be started from the server, initiated by the server, and it's got a lower overhead because basically you set the connection at the beginning, and then that's everything happening there, just information going around. So as we've seen, we've got new paradigms, and these new paradigms produce new challenges. Django was invented to meet the fast-moving deadlines of newsrooms, and it aimed at database interaction, template rendering, mature middlewares, and a full mature MVC model for web development. And it did a great job. Like along these years, it did a great job. It's been changing, but certainly some of the solutions Django provides by the inherent movements of the market, I don't know, the evolution of web apps, some stuff may sound a bit dated. And this I'm talking about the templating system, templates, and having to put your blobs of JavaScript everywhere. So I was thinking, I had this moment where I'm working in my company in Quantum. I had this chance where I could decide what I wanted to do for a project, and I could decide on the technologies and whatever. So I say, why not do this like an API and a single page application in Angular all the way, just as a proof of concept, just because I could do it. So this, I'm going to show you a solution which hopefully we can discuss, and I would be really willing to know how you've solved this stuff on your own projects if you've done it. But I'm going to show you like my implementation. Yeah, so what came out of this was this application called Value Home. It's basically just for the Spanish market, but it's an appraisal system. You would write your address, and it would provide you with valuation of your real estate. No? So it's really simple application. It's basically a form. It uses several APIs, and it produces a report with some predictions on the value of the housing and to the future, etc., etc. So yeah, these are my requirements because I could somehow decide on what I wanted to do. So it's basically a real estate app. I wanted it to be mobile first in some sense because there was a possibility of maybe doing a native app in the future. So having an API there for this possible future native app to use it. So it consumes diverse APIs. I will show you. It had to have user login and registration via email verification, if you know the flow. And I wanted it to be bleeding edge Django and bleeding edge Angular, just for the fun. So, well, this is the structure of the app. Basically, your client is going to make a request to Nginx, to the server, and it's going to return an Angular. I have 2 there. I'm now using 4, but application. So then you would be navigating across the app, and you're going to produce AJAX calls to these endpoints, which are in the API. All calls to those endpoints starting with API are redirected to my Django application. So you get JSONs there, as I showed you in this SPA single page application lifecycle. So Django is then taking charge of communicating with these diverse APIs. This one is like the cadastro API. It's like a public API, which is a bit of a pain in the ass. But it's there, it's public, and everyone could use it in Spain. We made our own appraisal API, Flask API. That's where you would send basically information of location and area of your real estate, and it would produce a value. and the Google API for maps, geolocation, geocoding, etc., etc. So this is my toolbox. Basically, this is the requests, requirements file, the most important part at least. I'm using the amazing Django REST framework. I'm using Django REST framework JWT for JSON Web Tokens. I will tell you about that. Restoff and allauth, and some stuff with course headers. Basically, these are the third-party apps. Those are how you get them installed in your Django project. Okay. So yeah, let's go on. Some observations. Well, use HTTPS everywhere. The API design is it's not like thought to be used in a public way. So it's just made to minimize the calls from the front end. So less calls. Forms are not really forms in this case. You basically use forms as a gathering way of gathering information, so you can generate these AJAX calls. And please take care on handling all exceptions. I couldn't stress this more. Like, think about things really can get really bad, especially if you're using third-party APIs, which are not reliable. For example, like this public API I was telling you. So yeah, authentication and permissions. As I told you, I'm using JSON Web Tokens as a way of doing the authentication. By default, my permissions. By default, in the permissions, I'm having all these views, views of the API that you have to be authenticated. This is by default, so that's something I wanted to have. And then I'm using JSON Web Token authentication. This is how you would configure it in Django REST. Those are the endpoints, the URLs for documentation. I will manage to make the talk available for you if you're interested. So this is how you would do it on your views. You basically, I'm writing allow any, so because of the default, I want views to be protected by authentication. If you want them to be open without authentication, you can do that. And yeah, that's basically it. JSON Web Tokens. I'm using JSON Web Tokens for authentication. Sorry, I've got to drink some water. I think I'm speaking too fast. So, yeah, JSON Web Tokens. JSON Web Tokens are a stateless authentication mechanism. So you have no sessions, no cookie. Basically, it's a token. It's a signed code, a line of a token, gibberish of number of letters. It can be decoded by the backend, Django's backend, to see if it hasn't been tampered with. So basically what you do is you put this token with the JWT schema in your authorization. That schema, JWT, can be changed, could be better. That's also typical. So yeah, you have Django REST Framework JWT that provides you with the setting variable in your settings Django file, which provides you with lots of configuration regarding this token. So what's a JSON Web Token? This is a JSON Web Token. It's created by, it's comprised of a header, a payload, and a signature. And this is something you can decode, and it's got information on the logger. As I said, this token is generated by Django. It's signed with its secret key. So if someone tried to generate a dubious token, Django would know. So what's logging in? Well, logging in is basically obtaining this token. This is the token that's going to be in each request and identifies the user. So you basically have these views, which are Django REST auth and Django. Yeah, those views. So basically, you get you make a request to the get token API endpoint, and you get the token back. This token is something you will store in your local storage. So every time you make a request, you're just gonna get it from the local storage and put them in the authorization header, and you would send them to the backend to have you authorized. This is basically what you do in the front end. You just get the item from the local storage. That's the last line. And you make the no, this is how you get the token. Sorry, to this get token endpoint, basically sending your email and password. And yeah, this was about authentication. This is registration. As I said, registration is something I wanted to do with email verification. OAuth, if you know OAuth, the package provides you with this. So you have to make a combination of OAuth and some other thing that's the Django REST auth package, which is pretty good. And basically, the first thing is you send an email and your password. Then you get a response saying if you can log in. So this will render a sending of an email with a link. Then you click the link, and it takes you to a front-end endpoint with this key, which identifies the registrar. And then this key gets stripped off, and it gets sent out to the API verify email endpoint, and you get a response, thus ending the login, the registration process. So the main difference here is that the verification endpoint is not in Django. It's basically in a URL living in the front end. So how would you do this? You're using Restoff and Restoff registration, which is an optional packet of Django Restoff. I'm setting this confirm email URL because, as I told you, like the confirm URL is living in the front end, not living in Django. I'm using this account adapter, a custom account adapter to inject this URL within the email you get for verification. And yeah, the authentication method is email, and it's mandatory. So I'm overriding these two templates, which are templates provided by OAuth, and you can change them as you wish. So yeah, you just have to, for URLs, you just have to plug in Django Restoff registration, and you're basically done. You have to set some dummy views in those two endpoints by OAuth, because they are the old endpoints for you've been sent a token, and you verified your token. Those were OAuth has them on Django, but we are going to have this in the front end, in the decoupled front end. And as I told you, there's a custom adapter which basically gets your URL of the front end for verification, and it's the way of inserting it within your email and your verification email, and you're done. So I wanted to tell you something about testing. This is how you would test your endpoints. I do tests for all the endpoints with expected returns, etc. And basically, the important thing is that you have to create a token that you can use on your authenticated requests. So that's the way you would do it with Django REST auth, Django REST JWT, basically. So you get the token, and you just add it in the client with the HTTP authorization. Basically, as you saw, it's just basically putting it there in the authorization header with a JWT schema. So I wanted to tell you something about CORS. This is hopefully something implemented by all browsers. It is, in fact. But it's basically, the idea is that same origin requests from frontends are allowed. If you have a request from a frontend that's not from the server's same domain, you will have to explicitly say it, and those that are from frontends that are not explicitly pointed out, they would be bounced away. So I'm using this because my front-end development server, Angular's development server, is running on port 2400. and Django's backend server is running in port 8000. Usually, so yeah, this basically would pose a problem because the origin of the requests during my development wouldn't be the same as that of the backend because they are two different ports. So I just indicate in my development settings that every request should be allowed. If you're using session authentication, I mean, you can use, I'm using JWT authentication, but you can use session authentication with Django REST framework. You can use token. You can use basic auth with REST framework. But if you're using a session authentication, Django implements this thing called the double submit cookie. And basically, you would have a CSRF token in a cookie and a CSRF header name, and this can diverge depending on the front end and the back end. So this is how are the default names for Django, and these are the default names for Angular 2. So if you have an issue with that, just check that maybe the CSRF is headers and cookie name are mismatching. Okay. So yeah, this is all I had to tell you about my implementation. So I was thinking, like, was it worth it? What did I learn? Well, basically, I learned a lot about front-end technologies and front-end framework, in this case, Angular. That was totally new for me, and it was totally a different way of thinking. I was really used to template rendering, template inheritance, etc., etc. I'd say it was fine. Django did a great work there, and there's lots of third-party packages that allow you to do amazing stuff. I don't know, I'm using a lot of ORM, so Django was a good choice. In the case of using, if you're gonna use lots of async or whatever, maybe you could check into using some other stuff like Node or whatever. So yeah, I was thinking that in the end, basically, I'm using Django in a weird way, and I could do this maybe in Node or whatever, no? So I'm thinking that Django should be like a way of thinking, even Python. You know, it's basically we're trying to solve something. It's not like the state of the framework. The framework is something that evolves, and if you keep this way of thinking as something that is more of an internet frame way of thinking more than a set of tools, these tools are going to change. Just think about it. And that Django could be an internet framework, so something that just not web applications, but it would be a framework for any web stuff you want to do there, because the web is not, the internet is not now just web. It's much more. I think that Django will still be relevant if we manage to leverage these newer paradigms and technologies. Basically changes the inherent force of the driving force of the internet, and those players that don't accept this or don't go with this flow may not survive. So don't hesitate to use Django in weird ways. Try new stuff, submit stuff. I'm checking now these new projects. You know, Django channels. That's amazing, an amazing project. And also, there's this new rewrite of the Django REST framework by Tom Christie. They're doing, like, you can check it out in API stars, and it's amazing. So there's lots of things going on. So yeah, do weird stuff with your Django. Thank you very much.
And we have some questions for you. So let's start with the first one. Django forms are amazing. Is there any way how SPA can utilize them? I'm talking mainly about server-side data validation.
Yeah, I have to say I tried to use SPA, just sending like the form, like in the usual Django way, and in the end I found it complicated. The fact is that these forms are not really my forms are not really complex in a sense, and I found it difficult to work with the usual form way of thinking. In the end, it was simpler to just use it as a way of gathering information and doing the validation some other way.
Okay, thank you. The next one, do you use external services for sending emails like blah, 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 or you run your own SMTP server?
Yeah, I'm using all Amazon services, so I'm using SES, and so far so good. It works fine, but I don't know much more of them. Like, this is like my first decoupled project, and I'm really glad if we could discuss new technologies and stuff, because I mean this is huge.
Okay, perfect. How do you pass settings and a CSRF token from Django to Angular?
Yeah, settings. The idea is that they have to be like really decoupled. CSRF token, it's not, in this case, as I'm not using I'm using these course header stuff, but I'm not using forms, so I didn't have an issue with that. And settings, I don't know which settings you mean exactly. Language, okay. Yeah, that's something I didn't have to take care about, and that's something that's going to happen, because maybe there has to be some. I'm usually just keeping information on the local storage, but that's something that maybe there should be some kind of session happening there. But so far, that's something I didn't have to deal with. Having things in local storage was fine.
Cool. What was your experience with Angular 2/4? Is it already production ready?
I think so. I believe it does. The thing is that it's changing like really fast, so you have to be there like something changes immediately, and you will have to make these minor upgrades, which sometimes can be, they are not difficult, but you have to pay attention to that. And in fact, I really enjoyed it. I don't know, I hated JavaScript a lot, and I didn't like having to put blobs of JavaScript in my templates, and I've tried Sekisai and stuff. I know it sounds weird, so now that I'm using, even using Angular 2 is not like even programming JavaScript. I didn't have this feeling, so I kind of enjoyed it, and I think it is production ready. You can give it a try, for sure. I mean, don't do weird stuff. My application is really simple. It wouldn't do something very big just in Angular, I guess.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Do we have some more questions? We have some time, okay.
Hi, my question is, how do you handle translations in the backend, in the front end? If you are going to handle in the backend, are you going to send the JSON response, or everything are you going to do in the Angular using filters, or I don't know? What's your idea?
That's somehow tricky, because basically that's something I didn't have to deal with, but I think it's something that should have to be dealt with in the front end. Basically the template translation and stuff. And I really loved how Django does it, but I don't know exactly how Angular does it. I mean, if you're sending information about messages from the backend, that's something that shouldn't really appear translated. I mean, something that shouldn't appear raw in the front end. So I think that its translations should happen in the front end, like totally decoupling that start, and maybe just use the data and some codes to identify this. But again, that's something that could be made 1,000 ways, and I would be willing to share ideas with you.
Also, I have another related to the Angular. I know that I can expert in the front end, because I know also more Django side. But have you considered, because you are talking about the big spread about the new web, right? And about the new way how you program webs. Mm-hmm. So also you consider, for example, mobiles. I was thinking if your idea is also to deploy, because I saw your image of a mobile application, right?
Like a what, sorry?
A mobile application.
Yeah, it could happen, yeah.
Have you considered maybe, for example, using React and also React Native instead of Angular 2? Because I mean, React Native is already for mobiles, right?
The cool thing with this is that you can do it. If I don't know, I have this kind of Google's queue, so I wanted to use Angular. I was really excited, and as I said, I had my requirements. So it was just like I could do this weird thing, which is usually difficult. That when you get there to your company, they say, "Okay, we don't know how to do it. You decide," and I say, "Okay." Let's have fun. So the cool thing is that it could happen. This backend is not that complicated, so it could totally be redone and use the same endpoints, and that's super cool because the backend is solid, and the front end is something that these kind of frameworks are always like, yeah, React, blah 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 blah. So I don't know. I still don't know which one is gonna be the prevalent or whatever, but you can just dump it all and do it again. Nothing's gonna happen.
Thanks.
Thank you for the question. Do we have some more? We have maybe time for one. No? Okay. So, well, I will thank you for the beautiful talk. It was really good. Yeah. I'm not the only one who enjoyed it.